a conversation with chef and writer
Tunde Wey, and I am a cook and a writer. You have to ask me a question. We talked about this already.
Where are you from?
So I'm Nigerian. I moved here 18 years ago when I was 16. I'm 34 now. Yeah, I live in New Orleans. I used to live in Detroit.
And I'm Rebekah Modrak. I'm a faculty member at the Stamp School of Art and Design, and an artist. And we met because I read, if you haven't read Tunde's amazing article about food and gentrification on City Lab, has anyone here had a chance to read that? It's really like, it'll change the way you think about food, and hopefully also maybe contribute to how you're thinking about Detroit. And I read it because my work has to do with consumption and being critical of consumption, and so I was interested in this idea of thinking about food the same way, and reached out to Tunde and invited him to come to Ann Arbor. And at the end, maybe at the end we could describe some of the events and things that are happening while you're here.
Yeah. Maybe not too much so that we don't give it all away, but yeah. Yeah.
So should we jump back a little bit and just maybe a quick overview, just so for people who don't know your trajectory or history, have a sense of that? And do you want to give that?
I do. I mean, is there anybody here who doesn't know who I am? No? I'm just, okay. My man over there, okay. In the Mickey Mouse shirt, I see it. So, like I said, I moved here when I was 16, moved to Detroit for college. That didn't quite work out. And so, as a consequence of that, I lost my status as a foreign student, so I was undocumented. But I think as far as food, which is why most of you are here, I think, I opened up a restaurant in Detroit in 2013, and it's called Revolver. And basically, there was just an opportunity to open up this space, and we can talk about that later, but anyway, it came together very quickly. About 5 months from the time my partner and I said we were going to do it to the time we opened. And I remember actually, because I was at the Green Garage, and Peggy's here. The Green Garage is our co-working space in Detroit. And I remember talking about the restaurant, but I wasn't quite sure it was going to happen, so I just kept calling it the hypothetical restaurant. Anyway, it became real. And I was there. So basically, the restaurant, we had different chefs come in every weekend to cook. So I didn't cook. And then about 6 months into that, I just felt like the food that we were serving, which is like new American food, some of the stuff that is kind of popular in most cities, was limited. Like I didn't have a personal history with that food. The things that I thought were delicious, people said were shitty. Things that I thought were terrible, people said were delicious.
Like what was that?
Oh man, I don't remember, but I remember like being just fascinated with like Mayo lemons and stuff like that, and radici, I don't know what the fuck it's called. Yeah, but it was like a different sort of cuisine to me. Yeah. But I felt like the whole experience was limited. But it was a pretty like hip restaurant, right? There was like a particular incident. We were serving a meal, and our clientele moved very quickly from folks who lived in Detroit to middle-aged white folks who live in the suburbs, which is great because they have the money. So they came and we were playing like rap music. No, sorry, we're playing jazz, like Miles Davis or Charlie Parker. And I was like, this shit is boring. I need to spice the shit up. So let's play some Biggie. And I put it on, and then this lady, she like called me over. She was like, can you change the music, because this food is so delicious and it's like beautiful, and I think that it pairs well with the previous music. And I'm like, I know this motherfucker didn't just tell me. Especially because, like, what jazz music was when it started is what rap music is now, and not really, because rap music is mainstream music, you know? And like this like lack of context, right? And this sanitization of blackness, of a bunch of things which at the time I couldn't articulate, but I just felt that was a violation. But it was necessary because like we needed to standardize the business and have people come. And so I think after that, like, we just had the jazz playlist and we only played like rap music when we closed. It was just like, so all of those things, I felt like I wanted to make a restaurant that was more in my image or whatever, like selfish like that. But so I was going to open up a Nigerian restaurant, and I'll just run through this. I couldn't find a chef to cook the food. The folks who were interested in investing in the restaurant, that fell through, and so I just decided to do it myself. It's the food that I grew up eating. I know what it tastes like. I just needed to watch YouTube videos to figure out how to make it. I consumed many YouTube videos. And then I'll call my parents, because my parents live in Nigeria, and I was like, yo, can you help me with this? But my mother, she doesn't operate by the metric system. So I'm like, how much do I need? She's like, get a tomato the size of your fist. I'm like, Mommy, my fist or your fist? She's like, yeah. Just I'm like, this is not helpful. So that's how I learned. That's how I started cooking, and I did it. And then a year into owning Revolver.
Were you cooking at Revolver at
I
the
wasn't.
time?
I was just hosting pop-ups parallel to Revolver. And so yeah, after we opened, and 6 months after I started cooking, my partner and I decided to like part ways, and he kept the restaurant. The restaurant is still going, and they do good work. And then I didn't have anything keeping me in the city anymore, and so I just decided to like travel and host dinners and cook, and I did that.
Can you describe a little the dinners that you host?
Yeah, so at that time I was just cooking Nigerian food, but I was interested in in my mind what was oppositional food. So like if the dominant food culture, which is like Eurocentric European food, I'm cooking Nigerian food as a critique of American food, as a way to say that there are more things that we can do with food, and that the way we understand food is currently limited. So that was the extent of my politics with the food. And I was traveling, and people would ask me, so what's the menu? And I'd be like, yo, you just eat the food, man. Like, I can't. People wanted to know what it tasted like. And because it was Nigerian food, and I knew they hadn't tasted it before, that first of all, I couldn't describe it with enough words that would make sense, you know. And second, I also didn't want to offer a reference point that subordinated my food, you know. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I was just eat the food. And in fact, I didn't even talk about the food. I was just like, yo, this is the food that you paid for. It's coming out. You should eat it. And folks ate it. And so I did that. I traveled, and I made sure, like, the things that I did consciously was I made sure to like cultivate relationships with the media. So I would travel to like to DC, and I would just like email the Washington Post, and I'll be like, your food coverage is horrible. and you guys need to cover me. And they'll respond, like, you know what, you're right. That's right about you. And I did that. I did that everywhere. I did that. I was going to New York. I emailed the New York Times. I'm like, listen, you guys have a problem. I am the solution. They didn't reply. Yeah, so I did all that, and then finally, I had been traveling for 3 months. I had done a dinner in New Orleans, and I got a letter or an email, sorry, from, because it's 2015, not 1800. I got an email, and these guys were opening up this food hall. Said, you know, we've heard about you. Would you want to open up a stall in our food hall? And so I said yes, and I moved to New Orleans. But then right before I moved, I finally got the email that I sent to the New York Times that they didn't respond to. The food editor at the Times responded, because like I had sent different messages to different people. And then finally I'm like, fuck it, I'm just gonna send it to the editor, like the top person. And he like emailed me 10 minutes later, and he said, like, can you get on the phone? I'm like, hell yeah, I can get on the phone. So we talked, and I told him the work that I was doing, and it was like, he said, because I was coming to New York, he was like, I can't come to your dinner in New York, but let's stay in touch and come and see me at my office. And then we'll see what we can do. In my head, I was like, because the New York Times, if you guys follow food, is like, well, the New York Times in general is the paper of record for the country. But the food section of the New York Times sort of like sets the tone nationally. And so, that affects like everybody. So if the New York Times writes something, it eventually trickles its way down into like Kroger, just eventually. That's just how it works. So there's like tremendous power in that relationship. And so anyway, we kept this thing up, and then when I accepted to the opportunity to open up in New Orleans, I like created this one more dinner opportunity before I was going to open, because I wanted to make sure that I had a Times feature ready for my opening, because in my head this was going to be it. And so I arranged for a dinner in Los Angeles, and I was going to go to Los Angeles, and the guy from Times was planning on flying from New York to LA to meet me and do this dinner, and it was going to be a big deal, and he had called people from his paper to come there and film me too. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But I was still undocumented, and I kind of still am. But and so in the 3 months that I had been traveling, I had taken the Greyhound bus because I didn't think I could travel with my passport, which is not true. You can travel with a passport, but fear makes you do crazy things. So I would go on like the Greyhound bus, and so I took the Greyhound bus from New Orleans to Los Angeles, and fortuitously, the bus takes a path through along the Mexican-American border. And if anybody knows anything about immigration, Border Patrol has jurisdiction within 100 miles of the border. And so they put up checkpoints. And so they put up a checkpoint a day before I was going to arrive in Los Angeles. Like they stopped the bus, and this dude came on the bus like in his uniform. And it was like a movie, in my head, it was like how you would imagine Nazi Germany, right? He just came on the bus. He was like, U.S. citizen, your papers. It was just like going down, just asking people, and I could just see him coming to me. I'm like, oh fuck, like, this can't be happening right now. And in my head, I was ready to lie. I was just ready to say yes, because it was arbitrary. Like some people, he would like linger around and maybe like ask for more for proof. Some people, he would just like go by, and when he came to me, like all my courage failed me, and I was like, I'm not a U.S. citizen. And then he was like, so why are you here? And I just like went in this long explanation. I was like, just come off the bus. And so he came off the bus, and I came off the bus, and that was it. I spent 20 days in detention, technically in like deportation proceedings, and but that was that ended because I paid a bond. My family paid a bond, and then I left there. Went back to New Orleans in time to open up this restaurant, in time to start working on it, and it failed in like 5 months later. And this is like this is a long story, but there's a reason why I'm telling that story. But anyway, when the restaurant failed, I was just like, fuck, like I thought this was going to be the thing, you know? And so when it didn't work out, I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And my wife, because after detention, I also got married, and it was like a busy couple of months. But my wife at the time had been telling me that I had sort of like separated my personal politics from my work. And so that had stuck in my head, and around that time, it was a year after, but the Black Lives Matter movement was sort of like still, or was pretty visible in like the media, and I was just like, so my wife telling me about, telling me to sort of like connect my politics to my work, this very obviously political situation that was being highlighted by Black Lives Matter around the extrajudicial killings of black folks, sort of like coalesced, and I just like, I need to do the same thing that I was doing my dinners, but then connect them to conversations around race. And ironically, I had met some friends in New Orleans when I started cooking, and like black folks, and they became like my library in a sense. Like they sort of began to like instruct me on, because I had questions about blackness, because blackness in America is a different flavor than blackness elsewhere. And I just immersed myself in reading, and I read a bunch of like research papers, and just not books, but just like a lot of research papers and articles, and just a lot of reading. I spent like 3 or 4 months reading, and then maybe even longer. And then at the beginning, the next year, which was 2016 in April, I launched a dinner series, Blackness in America. And then that was when like my politics was overt. And I was like, I'm doing dinners around blackness, and I'm talking about race and racism. And I'm explicitly calling out white supremacy and calling out white people. So.
Could you describe the first dinner that you had?
Yeah, oh my God, it was hectic. That was the first dinner. I was just like, because like the dinners I would cook and co-facilitate and co-host. It was hectic.
Who came to that first dinner? Like, how did you find an audience for that? I reached out to, I had a dinner with other black folks in New Orleans who were doing work that I thought was interesting. So there was a filmmaker, there was this lady who, she does consulting with nonprofits. She has a PhD in education. And they're all young, vibrant people like myself, young and vibrant. There was a lady who had started a community farm in the 9th Ward, which is the area that was heavily
impacted by the storm, and then there was this other educator who now works for the Brookings Institute, or works with them, and he was doing work around like race and education as well, and so they were like my co-hosts, and I really sort of like, they drew the audience, which was very generous, right, for somebody who, you know, basically they lent their cultural or their social capital to me, and so for me, like, New Orleans is like critical in like developing whatever sort of race consciousness or power consciousness that I have because of those people. Like, they sort of like extended themselves to me, and through that I was able to like continue to do the work that I did or that I'm doing. Yeah.
How do you start the conversation at one of your dinners? How does that happen?
Oh man, I don't know. It depends. I move with the spirit, I guess. I'll tell you about the last one that I did was in Memphis, and there's this scholar, and her work is at the intersection of feminism and blackness, and I had read her work online because she wrote this amazing essay on Beyonce's Lemonade, and it was just like incredible. And so I invited her, and then there's this food writer in the South. His name is John T. Edge. It's pretty popular to those people who know him. And he wrote a book called, or he just published a book called the Pot Liquor Papers. And it's a history of Southern food and the influence of I think it's called like the black hand in the pot, which is a reference to how basically Southern food and American food in general was built on the labor and expertise, experience, and knowledge of enslaved folks, and later black folks in the South. Anyway, so at this dinner, John T. Edge read from his book. Zandria read her writings, and then I started off in a very like awkward way with a song, which was horrible. And then we just had a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want to, can you describe what has come out of the conversations that is exciting to you, or of interest that makes you continue with the dinners?
So what is exciting to me? Well, the things that are exciting to me are the things that I have learned from doing the dinners. The reason why I told that long story about being detained is because, and the story about what's his name, the guy from the Times, is because like I think about power a lot, and I think about all the moments where I haven't had power, you know, and those moments have been real. And I have been forced to think about, not forced, but I'm thinking about that now because I'm writing this essay for the James Beard Foundation. Do you guys know what that? So for those who don't know, the James Beard Foundation is, they have this annual award, and they're basically like the Oscars of the food world. And literally, if you win a James Beard Award, if you're a writer, for example, you're most likely going to get somebody calling you up and saying, do you want to write a book? And I don't know if folks know, but if you get an advance, you could get an advance like of 6 figures. That's a lot of money. If you are a chef and you win an award, you're going to get investors who want to invest in your business, and so you win, so you make money. But what consistently happens is that the folks who are nominated and awarded are mostly white and mostly men. But then to like sort of like compound the situation, these are men who in some instances are cooking, you know, what I consider like culturally atypical food. right? So they're cooking Southern food, for example, or they're cooking like some Asian fusion or whatever. Like they're expressing their creativity, right? In a way that, in my mind, like obfuscates the folks who that food belongs to. And so I'm writing this this essay, and in writing I'm remembering this story of why it was important for me when I was doing my cooking to cultivate media, because what I was doing was I was cultivating power, right? And so that when I was detained en route to see this guy in Los Angeles who worked with the New York Times, because he was waiting for me, and they gave me a phone call. I called my wife and my brother, but then I called him and I said, like, I can't make it because I'm detained. And also NPR too, because they were going to be there, and the national NPR. And I was like, I can't make it. And when I was in the detention center, it's so interesting, like they speak in code, like the Border Patrol folks. And so when I came in, they were like, this is like, for example, this is an F6. And they were talking about me, you know? They just like gave me like an alphabet and a numeral. And so like they immediately dehumanized me in that space. And I had no idea what was happening. I'm like, am I gonna get, there was another guy who came in there and they asked you to take off your jewelry. And this guy he was, I think, Mexican. And so there was a language a barrier. Or he was, I don't know, he decided to keep he had a tongue piercing. And I'm gonna be, what's the word I'm looking for? Graphic, because that's what it was. And so they were talking to him, and as he spoke, they saw the tongue piercing, and they were like, yo, why didn't you take out your piercing? And then they made a joke, and they were like, oh, he's gonna get raped in detention. And so there were all these like little things that were happening. And so when they gave me my phone call, and I was like calling the Times, because I was also like, I'm like, don't forget that we can still do this interview later. Because I want that to happen. But I also, you know, was like hedging. And when I talked to the guy, he was very generous. He was like, I'm going to call the Times immigration reporter to call Homeland Security so that we know what's happening. Okay. And then they heard, the guys heard me, and then they responded to me. It was like, are you, it's like a weird statement, like, who are you? And are you, like, something like, are you somebody, or are you like, I'm like, yes, I am somebody. Like, I'm a human being, you know? And like, that was like one moment where like, this like investment in cultivating power, like at least like made a little difference. Like somebody connected with me. And at my hearing, where basically the judge was going to decide if I was deported or stay in the country on bond, my lawyer presented evidence. It's like, look at all the press that he's gotten. Like people know his name. The judge didn't care about that, but that was another moment that like highlighted the importance of power, right? So in the dinners and all the work that I've done in like interacting with white folks, the critical thing that white folks have and they want to hold on to, and by they I mean you guys, is power and control. And I know why, because who the fuck wants to be in detention and not have like a way out? Nobody, you know? So that sort of, that power and how it is manifest, how it is concealed, how it is like meted out in little quantities to curry more power, is interesting to me. And I'm so conscious of it. Like I got an email from an agent who wanted me to blurb for a book that is coming out, I don't know, maybe this year, of a popular young white woman in Detroit who is doing food, and she's releasing a book. I don't want to say her name because whatever, but and I'm like, if I have any sort of social capital enough to have this agent in New York like reach out to me and say, can you blurb for this white woman? I'm like, I'm saving that shit for black people. Like, I'm not gonna, if social capital is valuable because it's scarce, I'm not just gonna give that stuff to people who already have it and have them like continue to build on that. So I declined, and I said no. But this is the sort of like consciousness that I have been able to develop through the dinners that I'm doing, because it happens in like all these like little ways, right? Because it's not a big deal. Like I could just write 3 sentences and say, this lady is amazing and she's great, and I'm sure she's amazing, I'm sure she's great, and I'm sure her food is great, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that she's going to sell a book, and there's going to be a white woman in Detroit, a city that's 80% black, and we're going to have that woman represent the story of food in Detroit when there are tens of thousands of black women in Detroit cooking delicious food who don't even get anywhere near that attention. But that is not the problem, or that is only part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that when she gets to this place of power, who does she bring with her? Not because she is unkind or wicked, but because this is how the world works. She brings friends of hers who look like her, and then we've populated our consciousness with white people cooking food in Detroit, and we have totally invisibilized everybody else, and everybody else just happens to be the majority. And that's like the obscenity of the whole thing that I think makes it important to like call out the small things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I relate, of course, because I see white artists moving into Detroit, and they think they're helping, but they're taking, grant resources, and they're moving into communities that, without really thinking about the community they're moving into, and they're getting a lot of media attention, and not aware of what that means for them to take those resources.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you see power expressed through food? There's several ways. Like one, maybe like the article that you're writing, which I think a little bit about. You could talk about it there, or in the context of Detroit, how you saw it in the article that you wrote about gentrification, food in Detroit. Maybe like some of the observations in that article.
I think that, and I'm still like on my own like evolution or journey and learning. So I did this experiment, and it's funny because we had been, Rebekah and I and Nick had been talking about this, me coming in, doing this work for a while, and I was starting a project in New Orleans, and I was telling you about it, about basically I was gonna engage people around the question of racial wealth disparity, and I offered tiered pricing to people based on how they self-identified. And the takeaway from me, the biggest one so far anyway, was that, so I served the meal, it was $12, and then if you were white, or if I thought you looked white, I would be like, I would tell you, well, I'm asking folks who identify as white to pay a suggested price of $30, which was 2.5 times more, which reflected the racial income disparity. Because in New Orleans, the median net income for white folks is $65,000. For black folks, it's $24,000. And what struck me was this tug of like power in that moment. Like some folks would be like, interesting. So can I pay? And this was, so let me just set this up. I would first make sure that they wanted to eat the food. So there was no doubt about that, like they wanted my food. And then I'm like, well, I'm also here to talk about racial wealth disparity. And then I would say, do you know what this is? And folks would be like, yes, because it was the quiz and they wanted to, and I'm like, so tell me what you think. And they'll be like, no, you tell me what you think. I'm like, I'm asking the questions here. You just don't waste my time. I have to. And so they told me, and I'll be like, so how did this happen? And they're like, again, historical racism, and so they're giving me all of the facts, and people were telling me about redlining and giving me dates and all that stuff. And I'm like, wow, yeah. I'm like, all that is amazing and true, and unfortunate. So I'm serving lunch for $12. I'm asking folks like you who identify as white to pay 2.5 times more. You have a choice. You can pay 12 or you can pay 30, right? So this was after they had like acknowledged the problem. They understood that they were situated in the problem because they said, the history of racism in America and how white folks benefited and still benefit from redlining and housing values and for a lot of Americans, the value of your home is your biggest asset. Contributes greatly to your wealth. Unless you're in the 1%, and then it's a different situation. And so they were faced with the choice, and they had to pick. And so they had acknowledged in principle what they said their ideology was, which was they were anti-racist. So I was asking them to acknowledge in practice by paying more.
Would you tell them what would happen to the money?
So what would happen when I said to pay more, and they were caught in this position where they had planned to pay 12, but now they had to pay 30. Folks wanted to negotiate. Like, can I pay 12 and leave you a big tip? And I'm like, no, you just pay the 12, and I'm not taking tips, which was a mistake because I needed that money. But then I'm like, well, can I pay 20 instead of 30? I'm like, no, you either pay 12 or 30. So all these like negotiation tactics. And then finally, when they're like, okay, so where's this money going to? And part of the project was all the black folks and other folks of color who came to the stall to purchase a meal, I asked them, do you want money back? And I told them that the money will come from the, basically the net profit from the month-long pop-up, and the majority of that profit comes from the $18 difference that white folks paid. So when the white folks asked me where the money was going to, and I said it was going to the folks of color, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll pay the 30. And then I could tell like they had like entered this space where they felt comfortable doling out charity, right? And so I stopped them and I said, so we are collecting data on everybody, and most people here make over $65,000 a year. Nobody here needs your $18, and that we are giving this money out indiscriminately. It's not need-based or merit-based. It's just, I'm just giving this shit out. And that whole interaction just solidified in my mind this, again, the need for control and how control and power, how power manifests as control, and how a lack of power manifests as a lack of self-determination. And so the definition of racism that I share with folks is the ability to influence the life outcomes of other people, of other racial groups, right? So if I was walking on the street and somebody said something to me that was racist or whatever, or rude, that would be like a temporary, it would make me mad, but if they couldn't affect my health outcomes, if they couldn't affect my the reality of my wealth, if they couldn't affect the ability of my children to maintain a certain standard of living, then that has less material, I mean, then that sort of expression of anger or animus has less material impact on my life, right? If you look at all statistical indicators of quality of life, black folks in America are at the bottom consistently. And this is not because there's anything wrong with black folks. It's because there's something amazingly ingenious about racism that just like affects everything. And so like going back to this idea of control and power, that project solidified and made concrete in my mind that if we say, because everybody says this nominally, that we want equity and we want just communities, then we have to invest in self-determination. And what that means is that communities control their destiny. And I was reading this article or whatever book, and the writer made a distinction between freedom and democracy. And freedom refers to your personal choices, right? Freedom is the ability to express yourself in the way that you choose as an individual. Democracy, on the other hand, is the negotiation between all these personal freedoms that we all have. And the outcome of this like communication and negotiation should be equity, right? But because we have a power imbalance, and if we talk about race and we talk about class, white folks, affluent folks, have exerted their freedom in such a way that it has trampled on the democratic rights of folks of color, of folks with less resources. And the only way to create sort of equity that is sustainable for everybody is if we sort of like readjust that and have everybody's self-expression be equally valued. And well, yeah, basically.
Yeah. So that pop-up with the racial wealth difference in the pricing, do you feel like that was for the people who ate there at the time and who had those conversations with you at the time, or do you feel like the like real value of that is the story that's written about that then goes off and affects other communities?
I don't know. Maybe it's both, because I think it's both, because I only served a small. Excuse me. I only served a small amount of people, and so because I operate in like finite spaces, like for example, only this many people can be here. It's important that I use the media to communicate my ideas and my work. So yes, like it's both, like the people in the space and the people who read or listen or hear about the stuff elsewhere. Yeah.
Would you change something about how you structured that that kind of like experiment if you were to do that again?
Maybe I will when I do here. I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't think I would. I did it to like confirm my suspicion, which was that it's going to be a controversial thing to say in a room full of white people, but white people are racist. That's just like the truth. And I am, and I think like we have to like say that because we have to normalize it, but I'm afraid like if we normalize it, then we trivialize it too. So there has to be like a balance. But when I say white people are racist, which is a fact, it is like it's like aspirational, right? Like we have to work not to be racist. I am super sexist, because I've been conditioned as a man, and I've also invested in this conditioning because I have gained tremendous benefit from my relationships with women and how extractive it is, and that's just a fact. Like I can't. If I was denying that, I do deny that often. But then I go back and I think about it. I'm like, yes, it's true. I am sexist, and yeah. But these are just like I'm not even interested in litigating it. It's just a fact. If you're white, you embody a certain sort of privilege that makes you walk and occupy space in such a way that the things that are advantages for you, or the things that you don't even recognize, are a consequence of the dispossession of other people. That's just. I mean, the country was America was founded on that. I mean, slave labor, cotton, built the American economy. Even now, when we talk about sort of like, global capitalism and how it literally extracts from places like Africa, extracts cheap labor, extracts mineral resources to the detriment of the environment. Like these are just facts, and so we hold all these different like oppressive identities, and we also hold identities that are oppressed. And I think it's important that we recognize that. I kind of forgot why I called you guys racist, but maybe you guys the fact. Yeah.
Should we?
Yeah, and thank you for coming. Yeah.
This program was recorded on April 20th, 2018 at the Ann Arbor District Library.